Gold. Since ancient times, the shine of this metal has clouded people's minds, pushing them to the most desperate adventures, and sometimes even to crimes. People were literally obsessed with gold. And the most contagious of such afflictions was, without a doubt, the gold rush, the mass and spontaneous mining of the precious metal at newly discovered sites. Sometimes the gold rush infected hundreds of thousands of people, who abandoned their work and settled lives to travel to the other side of the world in hopes of finding some gold. Usually, when people talk about gold rushes, they mean the events in Alaska and northern Canada at the end of the 19th century. However, in reality, there were many more of them. In this episode, I'll talk about the gold rushes in North America and Brazil. You'll learn how the prospectors lived, how much gold they actually mined, and who really made money from extracting the precious metal. I'm Semyon, and I'm opening the How They Lived segment. Let's begin. The Brazilian Gold Rush. Few people know that the first gold rush happened not in Alaska and not even in California. You could call South America, or more precisely Brazil, the birthplace of this fever. The Brazilian gold rush began 2 centuries before the famous events in the Klondike, which were so skillfully described by Jack London. And in terms of scale, it surpassed all its subsequent counterparts. Large-scale gold mining in Brazil had a huge impact on the history of this country, and probably on the entire South American continent. It all began in the 1660s, when the Portuguese authorities were concerned with searching for precious metals in their overseas colonies, and they were lucky. Huge gold reserves were discovered in the southeast of Brazil, after which real hysteria began. Tens of thousands of locals rushed to the newly discovered deposits. And then immigrants from Europe followed. The outflow of people from Portugal was so serious that the authorities had to restrict leaving the country. Later, even more significant diamond deposits were found in the same area, which further fueled the already huge excitement. By 1730, half of the country's population was already living in the southeast of Brazil. And the administrative center of the region, the city of Ouro Preto, became a real metropolis, with a population of over 80,000 people. The government even had to move the country's capital from Salvador to Rio de Janeiro, closer to the gold-bearing regions. In total, about 400,000 prospectors took part in the Brazilian gold rush. In addition, 500,000 slaves were brought from Africa to work at the mines. However, prospectors died in huge numbers, just as they had arrived. The harsh climate, diseases, and hard labor sent tens of thousands of gold seekers to their graves. There was a constant war in the region between local bandits and settlers, in which Indian tribes took great pleasure in participating. Interestingly, the Portuguese authorities did not require prospectors to hand over all the gold they mined to the treasury. They only imposed a reasonable tax on it, about 20%. However, even this did not prevent smuggling. In total, from 1700 to 1800, about 1,000 tons of gold were mined in Brazil, and 3 million carats of diamonds. Then the deposits were depleted, and Brazil became a poor country again until it discovered another source of income: coffee. It should be noted that gold rushes usually follow the same pattern. The events in Brazil are a clear example of this. Any gold rush has the following stages. Discovery of gold. To start a gold rush, it's not enough to just find a gold deposit. Other conditions must also be met. There must be a lot of metal. But most importantly, it must be possible to extract it using primitive methods without the use of complex equipment. Influx of prospectors. If there is a lot of gold and it is easy to extract, prospectors quickly arrive at the deposit. Temporary settlements appear and later grow into major towns. At the same time, the region's infrastructure develops in parallel. Roads, ports, warehouses, hotels, and stores are built. Extraction using primitive methods. In the early stages of the gold rush, prospectors extract gold using the simplest equipment: a pan, a shovel, and a pickaxe. Mechanization of extraction. As the deposit becomes depleted, increasingly complex equipment has to be used to extract gold. As a result, prospectors are replaced by specialized companies. Departure of prospectors. With the arrival of the company, spontaneous gold mining gradually winds down and the prospectors leave the area. If there are no other types of activity in the region, the towns and settlements built at the beginning of the gold rush fall into decline. Gold rush in Siberia. Gold rushes also happened in the Russian Empire. However, they were not as large-scale as in America or Australia. The reason was simple. Until the mid-19th century, most of the population of the Russian Empire did not have the right to move freely around the country. Therefore, there was simply no one to develop the deposits. Although back in 1812, the Senate of the Empire allowed subjects to freely develop gold and silver deposits, provided they paid taxes to the treasury. It is believed that the Siberian gold rush began in 1814 when engineer Brusnitsin discovered a gold deposit in the basin of the Berezovka and Pishma rivers. There was a legend. The old believer peasant Yegor Dmitrievich Lesnoy found a rich gold vein on the Berekul River, which is in today's Kemerovo region, but he took his secret to the grave. When he learned about this, Andrei Popov, a merchant of the First Guild, decided to try his luck in the same place and bought a plot of land. He was lucky. In the very first year, the mine yielded a whole pood of gold, and after 5 years, 16 poods. Popov's success inspired many adventurers who set out to search for Siberian gold. The customs of Siberian gold miners were quite peculiar. For example, the former serf Tit Zotov, who made a fortune mining the precious metal, celebrated his son's wedding for an entire year. All this time, the guests drank champagne and even washed their horses with it. Zotov had a particular obsession with champagne. They say he liked to bathe young women in a tub filled with this drink. Another gold miner named Myasnikov ordered business cards made of pure gold, each of which cost as much as 15 kilograms of sturgeon caviar. One of the most famous gold miners of that time was Gavrila Masharov. In 20 years of working in the Yenisei taiga, he mined 12 tons of gold. After getting rich, Masharov started sending his pants to Parisian laundries. The local ones no longer satisfied him. He also cast himself a 10-kilogram gold medal with the inscription Gavrila Masharov, Emperor of all the Taiga. And in his later years, Masharov decided to build himself a palace with a temple and a greenhouse, where he planned to grow pineapples. The project seemed so ambitious and expensive that the Emperor of the Taiga got himself into debt. And when he couldn't pay them back, he was locked by his creditors in the unfinished building where he died of hypothermia. However, only a few managed to succeed. The work of the first Siberian prospectors resembled a deadly lottery where you could strike it rich and then squander your money. But the chances of dying somewhere in the taiga were much higher. By the end of the 19th century, the Siberian gold deposits had already begun to run out. Although private gold mining continued until 1930, when the state completely banned it. By 1861, prospectors had extracted more than 580 tons of gold in Siberia and the Urals. And until 1864, the Russian Empire was the world leader in the extraction of this precious metal. There were others later on. The gold rush contributed to the influx of people and capital into Siberia, which gave a powerful boost to the development of the region.
Золотые лихорадки в Северной Америке.
Most of the major gold rushes happened in the United States. This country has always had plenty of gold and people willing to mine it, sometimes in the most inhuman conditions. Gold was first mined in the United States in North Carolina, an eastern state. In 1799, a farmer's son found a gold nugget weighing 8 kilograms in a river. He brought the strange stone home, and for several years it was used to prop open the front door. Then the boy's father apparently became suspicious and took the strange rock to a jeweler, where he received a whole $3.50 for it. However, the farmer quickly figured out what was going on and founded a gold mining cooperative. A year later, he found another nugget, this time weighing 13 kilograms. After that, a gold rush began in North Carolina, which, however, had its own peculiar farming twist. From spring to autumn, farmers grew crops, and after the harvest they started panning for gold. The next gold-bearing spot on the map of the United States was Georgia. The precious metal was discovered here in 1828, but there was one problem for the prospectors, the Cherokee Indians who lived here. They prevented full-scale gold mining. The issue was resolved very simply. A law was passed to relocate the Indians from the gold-bearing territories. A few years later, the US Supreme Court overturned it, but it was already too late, since by that time the Indians had long been driven from their homes. During the forced migration, the Cherokee lost about a quarter of their people. The Indians themselves called the forced deportation the Trail of Tears. The gold deposits in Georgia were quickly depleted. That was the end of the gold rush. A total of 24 tons of precious metal were extracted here. In 1848, gold was discovered in California. This led to the beginning of one of the most famous gold rushes. At that time, getting to California was not easy. To do this, you either had to sail around South America or cross the entire North American continent. And on each of these routes, gold seekers faced different dangers. But these dangers didn't stop the brave ones. By 1849, 80,000 prospectors had already arrived in California. In total, about 300,000 people came here during the years of the gold rush. People came here for gold from Europe, Asia, and South America. The gold rush in California lasted for 11 years. After that, it gradually faded away due to the depletion of the deposits. During this time, the region received a huge influx of money and labor. For example, thanks to the prospectors, the population of San Francisco increased from 200 people to 36,000 in just 6 years. In 1850, California gained statehood and officially became part of the United States. During the gold rush, about 4,000 tons of gold were mined. At today's prices, that's roughly $50 billion. The California gold rush also had another consequence, an environmental one. The thing is, at that time, mercury was used to extract gold from ore. California's rivers were so polluted with it that even today, the level of this toxic metal is dozens of times higher than the acceptable limit. Scientists say that everything will return to normal in about 10,000 years. Who actually made money from the California gold rush? First of all, the sellers of shovels, pans, and other digging tools, as well as suppliers of food and clothing, owners of stores, saloons, and brothels. There was a shortage of goods, so prices were sky high. A regular blanket cost about $100. A bottle of cheap whiskey was an ounce of gold, and a revolver cost from 6 to 8 ounces of gold. Monthly rent and payment for a room in San Francisco could reach $2,000. In California, the founder of the famous Levi's brand, Levi Strauss, started out by making excellent pants for prospectors from defective canvas. They were so comfortable that they sold like hotcakes. Or another example, Samuel Brannan, a merchant and media magnate, became a billionaire and one of the richest people in the world by selling kitchenware and pickaxes to gold prospectors. Gold of the North. In 1896, rich deposits of gold were discovered in the tributaries of the Klondike River. This discovery caused an unprecedented stir among the local residents. But outside of Alaska, people only learned about the Klondike gold a year later. It was simply because winter had begun and the prospectors were cut off from the world. The only thing they had in abundance was precious metal. Everything else was in terrible short supply. For example, ordinary salt was sold at the price of gold dust. But by the spring of the following year, even the poorest prospector had $100,000 worth of gold. This story immediately made it into the newspapers, and that's when the real madness began. Hundreds of thousands of adventurers from all corners of the world headed to Alaska. There were so many people wanting to get gold that the Canadian police only allowed those prospectors who brought with them a year's supply of food. 800 kilograms. The rest were simply turned back. The Klondike Gold Rush is often called the last great gold rush in history. The names of the Klondike River and its tributary El Dorado soon became bywords for immense treasure. However, not all gold seekers managed to get rich. Often, they spent more on the journey to the Yukon than they later earned. Many gold miners died due to accidents, hard labor, harsh climate, and diseases. What can you say? People die for gold. Interestingly, the Klondike Gold Rush was one of the least crime-ridden in history. The prospectors created self-government and quickly established order. Before the start of the Klondike saga, no one had ever tried to mine gold in the conditions of the Arctic climate and permafrost. However, as we know, the thirst for profit works wonders, so a solution was found. The process looked like this. The frozen ground at the gold-bearing site was thawed using numerous campfires. They had to do this for many hours. Then they removed the soil and kept the fires burning. In addition to firewood, they used crude oil, fuel oil, and coal. After that, the soil was washed in icy water and the extracted gold was separated from the rock, with the help of mercury. Who made money from the gold rush? Many prospectors were lucky. They went home as rich people. However, they were not the only ones who benefited. The California story repeated itself in the Klondike. Huge profits ended up in the pockets of suppliers and speculators. The prices for everything were simply unbelievable. Owners of taverns, hotels, saloons, and gambling houses also made a good profit. And of course, Alaska and northern Canada turned out to be the winners. Thanks to the influx of gold miners, new towns, roads, and ports appeared here. The population increased significantly. Today, Alaska is one of the richest states in the USA. And as for the rest, today they can enjoy the wonderful works of Jack London, written by him after his trip to Alaska. By the way, the famous writer never did find any gold, but he enriched world literature with unforgettable characters. A genocide driven by gold. I already mentioned the sad fate of the Cherokee Indians, who were driven from their native land because of gold. Unfortunately, this case is far from unique. In September 1884, the French steamer Arctic was shipwrecked off the coast of Tierra del Fuego in Chile. A rescue expedition was sent to help it on a special vessel. The participants found rich gold deposits on the archipelago. This news immediately spread through all the newspapers, and soon adventurers from Europe and Latin America flocked to Tierra del Fuego. The arriving prospectors immediately came into conflict with the Selknam tribe, who lived in the mining area. The indigenous people were subjected to outright genocide. The gold miners attacked indigenous settlements, killed them, kidnapped women, and forced them into prostitution. If at the end of the 19th century there were 4,000 Selknam living in Tierra del Fuego, by 1919 their number had decreased to 279, and by 1945 only 25 remained. Today this tribe is officially considered extinct. A few words in conclusion. Now we can confidently say that gold rushes are a thing of the past. Nowadays gold is extracted using completely different methods. It's hardly something to regret, because the gold rushes gave us not only examples of perseverance, courage, and ingenuity, but also showed us the moral depths to which a person driven by greed can sink. Goodbye, everyone.